So for the people that have actually been logging into Google Analytics 3 recently, they might have noticed a few warnings or notifications start to appear. Obviously, it's kind of the 2nd of May, so we're getting less than 2 months away now. So you might notice some humorous warnings appear in my interest slides at the moment.
I got a countdown timer yesterday. They're using psychology.
Well, yeah, and the ironic thing is you can't get rid of it. Even when you say no thanks, it like keeps coming back. Like even for accounts that have migrated, that are linked, GA3 to GA4, and where you've ticked off all of 7 migration steps, you still get the countdown timer, which is kind of ironic because it's it's already been done, so they're reminding you that of what's already been set. Okay, we're kind of bang on time, so I'll just spend the first sort of 5 minutes or so just doing intros. This kind of a monthly webinar, we're going to cover how to redesign your website using a GA4. So for this event, we're lucky to have Brian Massey talking today. As an annoying warning kind of showing again. People might have noticed countdown timers start to appear in most GA3 accounts. So a bit about ourselves. So we're a Google Analytics and GTM specialist agency. We do lots of implementations and setups. And also we're involved with a GA4 migration app called GA4migrator.com. And some of the clients and customers we work with, normally in B2B, banking and publishing, and some non-profits in there as well. You may also see, by the way, with that warning, the pop-up warning, even though you close it, if you haven't marked all of your steps as complete, as in the 7 steps, it actually goes red. But the good news, if you tick off the 7 steps in Setup Assistant in GA4, this warning at the top actually goes blue. So slightly better. You still can't get rid of it, but at least it changes from red to blue. So ironically, if you click dismiss or let's go, it still stays there. There's no persistent cookie or memory in the Google Analytics notifications. Google is just literally trying to annoy everyone to death to try and migrate, even if you've already migrated. But we specialize in migrations, and we're doing lots of them at the moment. So hopefully that notification and timer is gone out the way. So a little bit about Brian. So Brian is a CRO expert and a guest speaker this month. He's going to show you how to redesign your website using GA4. We're going to cover these sort of 4 steps, 4 areas, how a GA is making things harder, how you can use spreadsheets as a viable reporting tool, how to use functions to evaluate your design, and what data really matters. And there's some takeaways that Brian has got at the end. Brian is got a book on Amazon, which is Your Customer Creations Equation. He's been in this game for over 16 years and has helped hundreds of companies improve their websites. He's a sought-after speaker, and we're grateful for having him talk today. And he's also done lots of online publications for Click Disease, Search Engine Land, and more. And you've also got a podcast which is on your 51st episode, I noted. So I've just subscribed to that, and one extra a subscriber. So Chris, if you put the link to the podcast in the chat, so hopefully more people can subscribe to that. With that, Brian, I'm just going to hand over to you.
Thank you guys for joining me. As you might guess, running a conversion optimization agency in which the majority of our clients were on Google Analytics. Switching to Google Analytics 4 is quite a challenge, especially in light of the fact that Google Optimize, which is a fine tool to use for A/B testing, is going away in September. So we've been actively working on how to turn Google Analytics 4 into an analysis tool that we can use to continue to optimize and completely redesign websites. If you're wondering, yes, I am wearing a lab coat. This is not a gimmick. It's not an accident. I wear the lab coat because science told me to. They've studied, there's an area of study, it's called enclothed cognition. It's a study of clothing and how it affects yourself and the people around you. And they've studied the lab coat and found out that when a group of people put on a lab coat, they're going to score about 17% higher on a cognitive test than in a group of people wearing street clothes. So there is science that says that when I put on my lab coat, I actually think I'm smarter than I really am. They've also studied the effect of uniforms on people. And they have found that when someone's wearing a uniform like a lab coat, people are more likely to put faith in what they say, to trust their words, to follow their instructions. And so when I'm wearing the lab coat, not only do I think I'm smarter than I really am, but you think I'm smarter than I really am. And this is a win-win for me. And it's an unfair advantage, you might say. We don't usually play psychology tricks, but what we do is use science to get an unfair advantage. And so when we're redesigning a website, we generally work from the assumption that you want the new design to outperform the old design. Yes, you want it to be pretty. Yes, you want the rebranding to be successful, all of that stuff. But these days, redesigning is different from, oh, let's change everything. Let's have some smart people change everything, push it out and see what happens. The reason that your website is not going to be successful is because in between your ears are 3 pounds of seething biases. These are shortcuts. These are stereotypes. And our brains need biases and these effects because we get a lot of information in through our ears and our eyes and our skin. And we really do need ways to make shortcuts. But when we are designing, we use these shortcuts at our peril because we tend to choose the things that we like. We tend to choose the things that worked for us in previous businesses. We tend to prefer the things that got us an award, but those are not necessarily the things that our visitors want for the redesign that we're doing. So there is a very straightforward way of dealing with this, and it's called the scientific method. So do some experiments. When we're doing a redesign, unfortunately, it's so much easier to focus on the design. We're visual animals, it's sexy, it's interesting, far more interesting than the tables and the charts that we might use to really inform our design. So our goal is to change this because when we focus on the design, it's just a playground for our biases and these effects that cause us to make decisions that work for us, but don't work for our visitors. The issue is this: we see a very logical path through this beautiful glade of trees in this park, and our visitors take a different path. We've designed the path. They should know to go this way, but they've chosen a different path, a desire path. Now, we can't just stop and say, oh, they want a shorter path, because that's our biases jumping in and getting in the way. It may very well be that people are taking this path because runners prefer to run on dirt. It's easier on their knees, so they maximize their dirt time. It may be that the sun is shining less on this path on those hot summer days. So we can't just assume that shorter is better. That's where we start to make mistakes. We need to do the experiments that help us understand what the real issue is with our visitors. So yes, this is behavioral science, and this is purview of what we're talking about. And Google Analytics is or any analytics database, but in this particular talk, we're talking about Google Analytics. It is the database of record. It's where you store all that information that you are going to use to answer questions about what your visitors are doing, why they're behaving the way they are, what's influencing them, what's standing in the way of converting, and what could you add to their journeys that would improve the number of visitors that are converting. We've done this with lots and lots of people, Russian literature majors, high school dropouts, all sorts of people have earned their lab coats and been able to do this. So well, I think most of you guys are going to be comfortable with the phrase behavioral science. Now, as we're testing, we're going to focus on the data today, but let's not lose sight of the reason why designing this way is great. First of all, helicopter executives will come in and make changes to your design if you don't have data that demonstrates that your design is the design that's going to potentially win when you lose. And if you've got experiments that demonstrate that, most good executives will be like, okay, I trust you. Even though I don't like that, I trust your data and we'll go with that. Same thing goes for agencies. When an agency comes to you and says, here are 3 mock-ups, choose the one that we should use for your new web design, you should say, I don't know. Go collect some data and tell me which one of these is most likely to win. So data is helping us manage these very important relationships. We all love to steal ideas from competitors, from other sites that we've been on, but just because they're on the other person's website doesn't mean they're working for the other person's website. And even if they're working for the other person's website, doesn't mean it's going to work on your website. So we steal like a scientist rather than just take ideas that we like and integrate them into our designs. These are, you guys, I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, but like these are the skills that you're going to need in the next 12 months, 24 months, just to be in this industry, analytics and marketing and behavioral science. So this is the one that's most exciting to me, especially for marketers. We tend to get safe in our marketing and the copy and the pages and the websites that we develop. Well, let's get a little crazy, because if we're able to run an experiment and see if one of these crazy ideas could actually be a game changer for our business, why not try it? Do a controlled experiment, try something a little strange, and you might find yourself sprinting ahead of the competition. Experiments are fine for little changes, copy changes, things like that. The big brand risks, we can use these experiments to take those risks out. And of course, everyone's looking for more leads, more sales, lower acquisition costs, grow the company. And that is the reason that people start working with data. Ultimately, there are so many other benefits that I've outlined that data provides, that's why they keep working with data. So here's how we redesign a website, keeping all of this in mind. Now, the old way is, all right, we're going to do a bunch of research. We're going to hand that research off to a really smart, creative team and development team. They're going to design. They're going to check in with us, design, check in with us. But we're not really going to know if of the thousands of decisions they made in developing that design, we're not going to know how many of them were good decisions and how many of them were bad decisions until we launch and we start shoving our traffic at that. And as you might guess, we do get a lot of calls from people who have beautiful, just gorgeous new web designs, but a drop of 30-40% in conversion rate, painful for the business. We always have an answer, by the way. Just go back to the old site and you'll get a 30-40% boost in your conversion rate. That's usually not an option after you've gone through this development process. So hard is this. Yes, do that research, but we, as we're going through the design process, as we're going through the creative brief, as we're going through the positioning, UX, visuals, launch, we want to be testing these things. So we can use user testing, for instance, to test the copy. We can use user testing, heat map testing, testing on the existing site to test the images we select and the layout. All of this is feasible. These experiments can be done before we launch. We don't want to wait till then. When we launch, we want to know that we've done enough experimentation that we have a good idea that this is already going to be a winner. We want to maximize this green area. We intersperse this development with periodic A/B tests. So we might use user testing to narrow down our choices for the messaging and copy that we're going to be using, but then we'll A/B test that somewhere on the existing site. Same with images and layout. So this is the way we design when we have resources that you guys provide, access to data and experiments. And in particular, Google Analytics 4 is making that a little challenging for us now. So there's some good reasons to test towards a redesign. One of the most basic is what we call redesign insurance. So sometimes we do redesign things. If we've been working with someone and running experiments and we know a lot about their visitors and we want to do a complete design of a page or even of an entire site, we will do that change in a testing tool so that we can get some insurance Basically, if performance is flat, then we know our redesign is helping things. We're able to do the rebrand or the replatforming without hurting things. If we don't see it's flat, if our new design reduces things, then we, in doing the launch, have collected the kind of heat map information and the analytics information that we need to figure out what's wrong with the new design and iterate on that. This is an example that we did for an online beauty school. We did do a redesign of their site based on the experiments we were doing and the visitor feedback. And we were fortunate in this case to actually have a boost. So if you're redesigning, why not redesign for a boost, right? In a more extreme example, we'd been working with Gailton for 4 years, and we really needed to redesign the site, essentially re-platform the site so that it more intelligently handled larger screens, smaller screens. It was not a responsive site, and we were just terrified that we were going to give back all of some of these wins that we had. But we knew a whole lot about their visitors. So fortunately, our redesign gave us a nice 13% lift across the board. So this is one of the ways that you can buy insurance on your redesigns. You can do this on a page-by-page basis. You can do it site-wide, but use these testing tools to backstop and double-check what your agency or your creative team, your design team is working on. And as I said, talking about big ideas, if you really want to go in and do something you haven't tried before, something maybe that's not non-standard, these experiments are fantastic for this. This is a site that sells a computer checkup system mechanic software online, and they went with the standard cart, show the product, show the price, and then you provide the blanks for someone to give you their credit card. We said, why don't we make this a little bit more of a product page? Let's remind them why they're interested in buying this and use the space for these checkbox and things like that. So this was a pretty big redesign at the most important point of the purchase process. The results were spectacular. We don't often see 54% lifts, but when we do, we are delighted and had a long relationship with this company. And then there is test before you invest. So when we are doing redesigns, we may want to implement some big ideas, but those big ideas will cause us to need to do things on the back end. So here's a great example of that. This is a standard landing page. So we were redesigning this company that sells fleet tracking software and hardware to businesses that want to track trucks and cars and trailers and anything that you can track almost that moves around the city. And we wanted to try going to a quiz style approach. And so the process of implementing this was for the back end pretty onerous, but we were able to simulate this in the testing tool. Most of these blanks didn't even save any information during our test, because as I said, if we wanted to save that information in the company database, we would have had to have IT do some work. So first we tested to see if this sort of a flow where we're asking specific questions along the way and not even asking for the contact information until the last step was going to improve things. And it was another one of those out of the park home runs. Incidentally, for those of you that are involved in the hypothesis development with your teams, this quiz style approach to replace what we call the stack of fields is winning in so many different areas that I would recommend giving this a try. So universal to analytics to GA4 is messing with this. We have these nice pipelines for our testing. We're pulling data into spreadsheets. We're getting the information we want, crunching the numbers the way we want. We're able to look at segments after we run our tests as we're going through these redesigns. And Google says, nope, I think we're going to end free analytics and free testing. We had a nice setup here where the website spoke to Tag Manager and this flowed into analytics. Google Optimize flowed into analytics, or whatever testing tool we use, any of the third-party testing tools. But the only limitation was sampling. So we had to deal with, if you asked for too much information, you were dealing with a subset of the actual data. And so, you had to play some games, either where you're pulling small pieces of information and aggregating those, or just not trusting the data if you were dealing with small segments, because the sampling would really blow those up. But there was a nice interface into Sheets. There was a nice interface to other reporting, such as Looker Studio. And then Google said, well, we're not going to do that anymore. So we needed to create new interfaces for A/B testing tools in the GA4. Not a big problem. But since Google Optimize is going away, we're going to begin paying for A/B testing tools. And I think, that's a win. The A/B testing tools provide a lot of reporting and goal tracking capabilities that most people will use. We don't use those. We actually pull right out of Google Analytics 4 to do our own analysis. But the problem is that when you checked in Looker Studio, it didn't work. So quotas, GA4 works on quotas, and Looker Studio is one of those tools that if you change anything in let's say you're developing a dashboard, if you change anything, it refreshes everything. So suddenly you've got 40 connections to Google Analytics 4. Google Analytics 4 limits you on the number of tokens you can burn per hour and per month. The free or the paid version 360 10x's that. So most people on the paid version are not having these problems with Looker Studio, but it's $50,000 a year. So what we're being forced to do is pull that GA4 data into a data warehouse. BigQuery, of course, is who Google wants us to use because it's their property. And then we have to pay whenever we take money out of that data warehouse. But this is at least allowing us to do things. Now, again, Looker Studio is thirsty for connections and refreshes. So there's some big bills that have been reported when people have jacked their dashboards into the data warehouse like BigQuery. So we're still interested in being able to use spreadsheets, and spreadsheets are the sort of thing that we pull the data that we need and then we do the processing on it. So we generally do not have issues with the quotas when we're pulling that into GA4. And we can pull right from the data warehouse into spreadsheets as well. So I'm going to suggest that you and your teams should get comfortable with spreadsheets. There are no more goals in, these are some of the things that Google Optimize was keyed on, and a lot of our analysis was keyed on, is the goals. They are now being replaced by conversion events and custom segments where you can pull property data from event properties. And use any of these to define events. There are no more saved segments. Now, we segment the hell out of data. This became a bit of sadness for us, because every time we start a new report for either within an account or across a new account, we can't carry those segments across. We have to redefine them each time. So this was a bit of a problem for us. And there's a lot more work. So the built-in reports are not as robust as they were in Google Analytics, the Universal Analytics. So we're having to spend more time in the explorations recreating those. So all of these things create friction in our pipeline. And in general, we're going to have to get more sophisticated. So I'm thinking, well, if we're going to have to get a little bit more sophisticated about the data, why not get sophisticated with a tool that most of us already know? And that's Google Sheets. So let me show you an example that we have here, is comparing UA and GA data. So we can pull data out of Universal Analytics. We can pull data out of GA4, and we have a nice list. I tend to pull these out on a daily basis with a custom report in Universal Analytics and GA4. These look good. The difference in this particular demo data pool was less than 1% difference. That sounds fantastic. But we were looking at total users here and active users. When you looked at those, this was a little bit different story. So there are 7% fewer active users being reported by UA. But when we look at it to the eye, it looks like this, is tracking pretty well. In other words, the Google Analytics, Universal Analytics, and GA4 data is correlating, is what we would say. Visually, it's what it looks like. There are a few weird spots here, like what's going on here? Does it mean there's a problem with our tracking or with our data? Well, what we do is we pull this data into Google Sheets. You can also do this with Excel. And this begins to give us an idea of just how close this data is. So you'll notice that here at the top of this graph, we've got some numbers. This makes us look really smart when someone's looking over our shoulder because we've got all these equations. But these are equations that you learned in middle school or high school. It's the basic equation for a line. You can turn on these by adding a trend line, right? And then you choose that you want to use the equation, and you also want to show what's called the R-squared value. Many of you may be aware of this, but if we want two data sets, if we don't know if two data sets are similar, in other words, if they're measuring the same thing, then the trend line should have an R-squared value very close to 1. And in fact, in this case, 0.968, if you're having trouble reading that, is very, very close to 1. So this tells us that the two data sets are correlated. When one goes up, the other goes up. When one goes down, the other goes down. And they do so for about the same magnitude. But the other piece of this is the equation for the line. And this is mx plus b. You guys remember y equals mx plus b, right? Well, what we can do is we can use this to diagnose what's really going on with the data. So m is the slope. X, of course, is what's along this x-axis. This is being used to calculate this number for the line. And then b is the y-intercept. So if we had perfect data, we would have an R-squared value of 1. If the data was reporting exactly, the slope of the line would be exactly 1, and the y-intercept would be 0. That means that we have a perfectly fitting data. It's probably a mistake because you are comparing the GA4 data to GA4 data if you've got that perfect a fit. But we can just divine some things from this. So if the R-squared value is close to 1, this is not a particularly good R-squared value. But you can see that it's a 0.76, so it's closer to 1 than it is to 0. But look at the slope. The slope is 0.0137, so it's closer to 0. And this is telling us that while the data correlates, it moves along similar, there's something wrong with this data that the slope of the line is not closer to 1. So this begins to tell us, I mean, we can look at the scatter plot and say, this is probably not going to carry the mail. The other thing is if the y-intercept is off, that means that there is some scalar value that's being added on. In this case, these are daily plots, some scalar value that is being added. And so, for instance, you might find that one of the, like you moved to GA4, but you didn't carry your bot filtering settings over. You might find that GA4 is over reporting sessions because those bots haven't been, it would be a fairly consistent scalar amount of bot traffic that is being added in. So we begin to be able to diagnose this is a scalar issue, which means there's something being added to the top line. A constant is being added. We can also look at the slope. And so whenever I see a slope that's 0.5 or 2, because you can swap these two data sets along the X and Y axis. But if it's 0.5 or it's 2, then the first thing we guess is there's probably double counting going on somewhere. The Google Analytics tag has been added in Tag Manager and on the site, or something like that's going on. You'd be surprised how often that happens. This is going to also indicate that maybe we're breaking sessions on the GA side. If we were using UTMs on internal links on the website, that creates a new session. Or if we're going off to a third party, like a checkout or a third party tool, then or we're getting signals from an iframe, all of those things can break our sessions, and that would cause this tilt in the line. The line is too flat because this is a percentage added to each day. So the larger numbers have a larger number of things added to it because it's a constant percentage, and the smaller numbers don't grow as much. So that tilts our line. So that's a clue there. And if, for instance, if there are some pages that we just didn't put the new tracking codes on, GA4 tracking codes on, that will show up in the slope as well. In this case, this is roughly 2/3. So we'd say like, well, there could be tracking codes missing from as much as 33% of the website based on what we're seeing on the slope. And so in all of these cases, the data looks the same. I mean, to the eye, we really can't tell the difference between these two things. The R-square values are telling us, oh, this data is perfect. So we really do want to go in and look at that equation and make sure that not only is the data correlating, but that we are tracking down anything that would give us data that we're going to be making decisions, poor decisions on as we go through our design. And Phil, I don't know if you're collecting questions. I am going to leave some time for questions at the end. So I would at this point say, everybody, drop your questions into chat, and I think we'll save those to the end, right?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Oh, there is a Q&A feature. So if people put their questions into that in Zoom, then it makes it easier to separate. Using
A/B testing tools, just very quickly, I thought you guys would be interested in kind of our analysis of the tools. Google Optimize, we really only use the targeting and splitting features of the A/B testing tools. As long as they can inject our JavaScript, we're going to be fine with them. Some of them have pretty good WYSIWYG tools as well, but we tend to use our own JavaScript. As a quick survey, we're finding that convert.com is probably one of the first we recommend, especially to anybody that's doing business overseas. They've done a good job of being as GDPR compliant as possible. We are seeing issues with Google Analytics 4, and European companies are not embracing it because it doesn't pass muster yet. That was one of the promises that Google made with GA4, but it turns out that over in Europe, they're saying, nope, not going to cut it. Chameleon is a great solution for enterprises. They have a fixed pricing model, and a really fantastic tool, some very interesting reporting capabilities. VWO has been around for a long time. We've used it for a lot of clients. They are leaning towards longer contracts and things like that. But it's a solid tool. OmniConvert, we like them for people who want to do retention targeting. They have integrated this tool with a tool set called Reveal that will do recency, frequency, and monetary analysis, so that you can really start to personalize your experiences based on whether someone is coming back likely to buy or not likely to buy. Conductrix is a sophisticated tool, a little bit like, I think you guys would find it fabulous to use. It's very flexible. I think it requires a little bit more sophistication. And if you wanted to see a summary of all of these, the CXL.com has done a fine job of summarizing them. And this is the link here. Keller, we're going to be sharing the slides after this, or do they request them?
They're normally, we'll send out the slides and the recording normally a couple of days after. But if they want to email you directly for a copy of the slides beforehand, that's fine to do so.
Okay. So I'm all in on Google Sheets. We've been using it for a while, but I think there's a good case for it. So number one, it does integrate with GA4. There are a number of tools out there, connectors that will pull data in from Google Analytics 4 into your sheets. We went ahead and wrote our own, and I'll show you some of what we did there. I'll be using that, but you don't need to use that integration, although I'm going to make it available if you would like the spreadsheet that does that. So we know how to use spreadsheets. We can save the reports across accounts. So when we've set up a spreadsheet with sort of reporting, and we need to use it on multiple websites or multiple clients or multiple reports, it's very easy to copy those things because we don't need to reproduce the segments across those. And since it's not constantly updating its data, it only does so whenever we say go and get the data. It's less expensive to interface with either BigQuery or less expensive in terms of tokens when reaching out directly to GA4. So it kind of allows us to bypass, for some of our clients, bypass the BigQuery to Looker Studio piece of the puzzle. You guys might be familiar with the Google Analytics add-on for Sheets for Universal Analytics. This was really flexible. It was a Google Sheet that had a column of parameters, and then you would just define what reports you wanted pulled in successive columns. And this allowed us to do programmatic things using functions, macros in Google Sheets to populate these, and really gave us a lot of flexibility. And you guys might want to, especially for some of these, comparing the data, you might want to go ahead and install it if you haven't already, and be pulling data out of Google Analytics 3. It's an easy way to pull that data to compare to your GA4 data. But it pulls spreadsheets like this. So you can get the device category report right in the spreadsheet with simply by filling out a few lines of code in a column. We liked this so much that we went ahead and we reproduced this, not as an add-on per se, but we have created a bit of code that will do the same thing. The structure of GA4 is a little bit different. So we've got dimension filters and metric filters. They're called filters and segments in the older version, but it's the same sort of thing. So you define whatever reports you want to pull. It will create a tab for each of these, and then pull the data based on the metrics you want, the dimensions that you want to track, any filters or segments that you want to define. And it's just a very easy way to interface with Google Analytics 4, especially if you've been using Google Analytics 3. Now, it has similar output, but we can look at a few things and begin to get an idea of, number one, how our quota is doing. We get 5,000 tokens an hour. And in the past, we've seen that each one of these reports is burning somewhere between 7 and up to 50 tokens based on the length of the report and how much data we're pulling out. Interestingly enough, in the last few weeks, so this report was run back at the end of February. In the last couple of weeks, I've noticed that the quota consumed, the cost of these reports is coming back as 1 for everything, no matter how, if I expand it to multiple months, it's still only costing me 1 token. So I think Google is hearing our cries of this is not enough, this is not enough. And at least through the API, they're significantly increasing our ability to pull as much data as we want. So this is, I think, is another shot in the arm for the spreadsheet approach. Google Analytics, when we're running experiments, the experiment impression event is what we've been, what they used in their interface with Google Optimize. So we've continued to use that for ours. The difference we've added, what's the provider name? And sometimes we like to have an experiment name. You can add things to this, like the date that the experiment started, things like that might be helpful. And as we're using more and more personalizations, we use that flow as well. So these events are being written. They are being typically created as user, or being exposed as user custom segments. So experiment ID is a custom segment, variant ID is a custom segment. We give those user scopes as makes sense, because user scope is something that's changing rarely and associated with the user. So what we do is we create a test setup, and we put the start and end date and some details about the experiment that we're running. And then spreadsheet goes in and populates all of these values for us. So it becomes quite easy to make changes, to have standard spreadsheets where we're changing the details of the experiment, the length of the experiment, or the data that we're interested in. And, at the top line, we're really interested in, do we have enough conversions? What are the conversion rates? Is there a lift? And from a frequency standpoint, is there confidence here? We'll also calculate the Bayesian. Unfortunately, for the online tools that calculate Bayes, the Bayes, they're really only treating the entire experiment as one experiment. So you generally find your Bayes percentage maps pretty closely to your frequency confidence. And with the confidence, you can get an interval that helps as well. So these are the things that typically your A/B testing tool will provide you, and you can get them from your A/B testing tool. But the issue is when you want to know something like, okay, we've had a test complete, the new design, it's inconclusive. So it doesn't look like it's an improvement over the old design, but you want to go in and say like, all right, did mobile behave differently? Maybe even what we're seeing a lot now is iOS and Android are behaving in opposite directions. So the Android people love the new design, the iOS people hate it, and they offset each other. To calculate these values, I've in the spreadsheet that I have, I've provided a number of named functions that is a new function in Google Sheets, and is very helpful. But when we're talking about managing these segments, we go into explorations and we have to recreate these segments in each of the new reports we do, or pull them out of the library. But in general, we have to go cross client, so it's not as easy as saving a template in the library. And so we're using the same language, I guess you would call it, the same code as the reporting API over in the Google Analytics, the Universal Analytics world. This is the same sort of notation that is used in the Google Analytics for Sheets add-on, and allows you to define your segments, as an exact match, as a regex match, as a not, as it contains. You can kind of have multiple metrics and multiple dimensions filtered using the semicolon and the colon. So all the capabilities are there in our GA4 version, and we can pretty much use it as we did with the Universal Analytics. The names here have often changed, and that's one of the only difference. If you're interested, by the way, in getting a copy of this sheet, this is the URL conversion-services/GA4 sheet, and I'll share that at the end when we're asking questions as well. So this becomes a way of saving our favorite segments, many of which are much more complex than this, depending on the client. This is a real win for us, that we don't have to keep going back and redefining those and potentially making mistakes. But when we're looking at, like, let's look at the mobile segment, let's look at just the organic traffic for this test, control and variation. Did we see a lift, and was that lift statistically significant? Not so in mobile, but the organic traffic seemed to really like it. And we want to make sure that we are not looking at lopsided samples. So there's a function in there that will calculate the sample ratio mismatch. Again, in this spreadsheet, the URL that is here. So we can confidently go in and look at these different segments and begin to understand personalization opportunities, refining our hypotheses. Maybe we should test something different, or we can just decide to, for iOS people, we're going to let them see the one they liked, and for Android people, they get to see the control. This sort of post-test analysis keeps you from having to test over and over and over again. If you just decided it was inconclusive, you would move to test something differently. This really does give you a lot more data for each of the tests. And since we know how to use Google Sheets, we can create our own graphs. So we can create the cumulative graphs for these different segments. So this organic versus the variant versus the control, this organic segment, here's what the trend looked like for the conversion rate. Here's what the trend looked like for the number of conversions. And we've even gotten fancy. So in the spreadsheet, started to recreate some of those lovely reports that we really enjoyed being able to just pop open in Universal Analytics. It gave us something for our eyes to look at and see if there were any issues. the ability to switch different, instead of different goals, we're switching conversions here, and even filtering our primary dimension using regex, which this was always a great opportunity to test our regexes that we were using elsewhere on the site. So hopefully I've made the case that spreadsheets are the way to go moving forward, at least during this transition. I think GA4, the default reports will get better and better. But right now we've got this transition to worry about, and Google is clearly panicking. They thought more people would be moving by now, so they're really putting the hammer down. I see there are a few questions in QA. This is the link to the GA4 sheet. This will force you to make a copy, but then you'll be able to run the reports, marry them up with the Google Analytics add-on for Universal Analytics, and be comparing data, be pulling data, be looking at segments, whatever you want to do. I'm just more comfortable in spreadsheets than I am in data warehouses at this point. In general, though, it's free analytics is over. We're going to have to get more sophisticated. Google Sheets is, I think, a great stepping stone into being more sophisticated. And send me an email if you need some help or need some clarification or need any help using the spreadsheet. Phil, do we have questions? Let me see. What does he mean of using his own JavaScript for the A/B test tools? So if we look at a design like, let me pop over here. We look at a design like this one, clear this out. So you couldn't do this in a WYSIWYG editor. We actually had to create pop-ups that contained forms that required these steps. So we had to write JavaScript that we add to the testing tool. And so the testing tool says, whenever I'm going to assign somebody the variation, I'm going to send this JavaScript to their browser, and then their browser is going to make this disappear and make this pop up. And then the JavaScript is running so that whenever they add to that, they will move to the next step, and so on. So this is something that requires front-end development, and that's what I mean by JavaScript. So when we are redesigning a page like this, we need to change not only the layout by moving things around, but we need to change the CSS. And so you really do need a little bit more sophisticated way of testing your ideas than just using the WYSIWYG editor, where you can move things around, you can make things disappear, you can change headlines, you can change images. But the WYSIWYG editor bumps up against capabilities pretty quickly for some of these more sophisticated style of tests. So Stefano, thanks for the question. I hope that answered your question. Can you expand macros he is talking about in the GA API G Sheet add-on? So the Google Sheet add-on is actually written in AppScript, which is a version of JavaScript. And so since it's not an add-on, we haven't taken the step to turn it into an add-on. I would welcome anybody who wants to do that for us, is willing to do that work, would be great. You're going to have to, what you want to do is go over here to extensions, AppScript, and it's going to actually show you my code. So this is why I didn't want to do it as an add-on, because I think this might be helpful for those of you that do like to code. And you can see the functions that are here. Yeah, you're going to want to run the on-open, and what that's going to do is going to create this little menu item. And then once you've filled out all the stuff that creates these reports, like your own GA4 property ID and stuff, you'll say run report and it will run. And if you want to compare the two, you can actually have Google Analytics add-on running here as well. I don't have that included here, but so that's what I mean. That's what I mean by the macros. And yes, you can use that. You can use that code to. You can use the code that I'm providing here in any way you want to to do more interesting things. Rate limited, not GDPR friendly, more expensive, more config, fewer out of the box views and reports. What does GA4 do better? Are we simply getting a worse product? Help me be less pessimistic. So it is a better model. So once you get comfortable with creating these events and the properties and seeing how they flow into reports, it's going to level up your ability to see how universal analytics is going to start looking kind of rinky-dink. Actually, is what has happened for me. So I love the flexibility of creating richer events. I love that these events have definitive timestamps, so we can honestly say something happened before another thing happened before another thing. Whereas in universal analytics, it was always a little bit, it was iffy because everything was thrown into a big session table. Once you're comfortable with GA4, you're going to appreciate it more than universal analytics. And you're going to be a better data person. Google Analytics 4 keeps you from doing dumb things, like making decisions where you're combining a user and a page view data in one report, which is, when you cross scopes, you can basically get any data that you want. So it's going to help enforce that. It's going to make us all better, and it's going to be painful, but we're all going to get better. That's what life's about.
I would just on that one, in some cases there's not so much of a choice in the sense that if you're using Google Ads, you kind of have to use Google Analytics 4, or well, you can use the kind of Google Ads conversion pixel, but it's kind of like a walled garden in the sense that GCL IDs can't be looked up. And it's still free, so that's there's still a big advantage there. So I did it does seem like on the CRO side, Google's just trying to introduce APIs for other tools to connect to Google Analytics 4. So in essence, they're trying to let other people create versions of Google Optimize and just push those variations or personalizations into GA4, and then kind of because Google's kind of moving more like Amazon, as in encouraging more people to use the cloud and just wants to be the sort of data lake. So I think that's interesting in the sense that the options of pushing the data there are still exist. It's just the ability to run those tests has disappeared or disappearing.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that is people often forget, you can still use Google Optimize for from 1st of July through to September. You've just got to use Google Analytics 4 to do it. It's only after September it stops working. So there's still like 5 months left on Optimize. It's just 2 months left on GA4.
Yeah, and there's some tricks to using Optimize in GA4 and getting the kind of reports that you're used to. Here's the hint: user scoped dimensions. When you set up a custom dimension on when you use on these properties set these properties right now, they're listed as event properties, but these should be user scoped properties, and it will help you a lot because otherwise they're invisible. They don't return any data.
Yeah. Just one interesting one for the audience, which I stumbled on recently. The Optimize personalization ID is actually too long to set as a user scope property. So it's capped at like 26 characters. So you're kind of forced to set it as an event level, even though it's ideally a use level.
Oh, no kidding. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. A bit of a kind of a bit of a mistake by the Google developers there. It doesn't. What we normally do is we just try and shorten it to personalization _ ID instead, put that as user level, and then we just map repurpose the old value. So we kind of in effect relay it so it still works.
Got it.
In terms of other questions, there's one here from Scott. Will you be providing the user guide? It's referenced in the read here tab of the Google Sheet. So I opened your Google Sheet and thanks for sharing that. There's definitely a need for a GA4 kind of Google Sheet for automatically refreshing, and looks like you've got some good graphs and like tabs preset up in that. The read this bit or explain it goes off to a Google Doc which says request access. So I think that's what Scott is referring to. So I
Oh, it's
just
saying request access. Yeah, I'll fix that and
yeah.
make that available. If you aren't able to do that with the link, you can shoot me an email and I'll make sure that you get a link to that. Yeah, I need to go see what's broken there.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's that link which the README goes through to. It's not broken, just but okay.
Not permissions, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. If I could just in the last kind of few moments, have you got any closing remarks or anything else you want to add just before I take over screen share?
Just very quickly, Seb asked, would you recommend going directly to BigQuery for all test reporting? We're able to get there with Google Sheets, but we are using BigQuery. Check out a tool called Analytics Canvas. It's kind of like a buffer between GA4 and BigQuery, and will help you keep the cost of your BigQuery accesses down. And I think that's it. So that was the only other question I saw.
Yes, and one other announcement: Google have extended the kind of backup time. So it used to be Google Analytics 3, the reporting bit of it would stop working 6 months from the 1st of July. In last week or so, they've bumped that by an extra 6 months. So GA3 for the free version and the 360 version now both stop at the same time for reporting. So in terms of backing up your data, you get an extra 6 months. So it's really the 1st of July next year where reporting access disappears. So that's a small benefit. Obviously it's not going to collect process data from after the 1st of July unless it's a 360 account, but yeah. The Analytics Canvas are doing some pretty cool stuff with backups from GA3 to Google Cloud. So a quick, I'm just going to share my screen for a second. And just a date for your diary. So it's not the 1st of July, but it's actually the 1st of June. So we've got another GA Forward Mark III event, full day GA4 training, and we've got some great speakers lined up for that. So we've got Jim Stern, who's just industry legend, totally awesome, and Ahmed is also talking about Data Studio, and Ralph is also talking about Data Studio. And then we've got some other speakers that we're going to announce so shortly. It's going to be, we've got a great lineup. As I said, free to attend, going to give away loads of free content and access to some tools. So it's going to be in effect one month before everything goes crazy. So at least get a bit of a heads up beforehand. So I've just put the QR code to scan if you're on a mobile phone there, or Chris, if you could just post that bit.ly link that goes over to LinkedIn. If you click subscribe on LinkedIn, you'll then get alerted to the event when it's coming up, which is literally in just short of 2 months' time. So that's the same QR code. I'll just leave that open for a second. Thanks again, Brian, for that talk. I was looking through your GA4 or the Google Sheet, and then actually there's some really cool stuff going on in there. And I was trying to hunt where you changed the GA account ID just to try it out, or try out on the GA4 demo account just to see how it flows through. Definitely useful for kind of replicating where, because people are used to using Google Sheets, especially on the marketing side. Also, if you're pulling in data from ChatGPT into Google Sheets or whatever, or needing it for like basic like VLOOKUPs and stuff, it's quite handy to be able to do that. So the lack of a native plugin is a bit of a there's definitely a need for that. Cool. Thank you again, Brian. And I think I've posted your email in chat. Hopefully that's okay. And I've also just posted your podcast. So what's your next talk on your podcast, Brian?
Next talk on my podcast is going to be Rishi Rawat, and we're going to be talking about copy that converts.
Cool. That sounds really interesting. All right. Thank you ever so much. And cheers again, everyone.
One thing just before we go is we're collecting feedback for our GA4 migrator tool. So if everyone would like to, please visit ga4migrator.com and use the tool. We'd be grateful for any feedback.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, we've done some quite big upgrades to the tool. So if you've got any, if you've got a GTM account that you need to auto migrate, because the standard migration for auto migration for GA4 doesn't actually cover GTM, which is kind of ironic. So the tool does that, the migration of events and custom dimensions to custom definitions. So please check it out. It's totally free at the moment. So feedback on it would be really, really helpful. All right. Thanks again, everyone. And thanks again, Brian. Amazing talk. Thank you. All right, cheers. Bye.